NASA is legendary for their space missions, but they've had plenty of failures alongside the successes. Sometimes things have to be abandoned, costing the agency millions of dollars and leaving a bunch of astronauts and scientists disappointed. What happened with some of these forgotten projects? Well, I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 abandoned NASA missions you've never heard of. But before we begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe with that notification bell. It truly helps the channel. And also let us know what other space lists you'd like to see next. With all that said, let's blast off. Or try to. 25. Project Orion. A nuclear-powered spacecraft sounds interesting. But what about a spacecraft powered by nuclear bombs? If you think that's a scary idea, well, then you're not alone. Between 1958 and the mid-60s, NASA conducted a study that put the boom into sonic booms, dubbed Project Orion. It used a nuclear propulsion system where plasma from powerful detonations would hit a part of the craft called a pusher plate. This theoretically gave the ship the thrust it needed to reach space. It was innovative and explosive, however, it was that latter part which ultimately put the brakes on Orion. By 1963, partway through the project, the nuclear test ban treaty was implemented, ensuring Project Orion never got off the drawing board. 24. Voyager Mars. Before NASA's Viking program landed on Mars in 1976, the agency had another craft in mind for visiting the red planet. This was Voyager Mars, composed of twin orbiters and landers and propelled by Saturn V rockets. There were high hopes for the project, which, like Viking, was developed in the 70s. So how come the Viking craft went to the Martian landscape and Voyager Mars didn't? The depressing answer is budget cuts. Voyager fell victim to bad timing and red tape. There was an upside, however. Without the work completed on Voyager Mars, Viking wouldn't exist. But it was still frustrating that NASA couldn't use their original idea for this historic mission. 23. Dyna-Soar. NASA missions don't usually have the most exciting of names, but this one was different. They called it the X-20 Dyna-Soar. This wasn't a reference to prehistoric animals, by the way, just an abbreviation of the term dynamic soaring. Plus, it was a project worked on by Boeing and the US Air Force more than NASA. That said, it had a dramatic impact on how the agency built things, as you'll soon discover. First, let me tell you what the craft actually was. The inventors intended the X-20 to be a space vehicle, something that would shoot into orbit and perform rescue missions. It was also seen as an attack plane, capable of launching bombs and such. The X-20 wasn't a single-use type deal either, unlike other spacecraft at the time. They wanted it to fly and fly again, though sadly this wasn't to be. Work on the special plane was done between 1959 and 1963, after which NASA took the concept and ran with it. It became a key reference point for their iconic space shuttle, making it an important part of space travel history in the US. 22. Constellation Program. Did you know NASA hasn't put an astronaut on the moon since 1972? So what have they been doing since then? Well, one thing they did was initiate the Constellation Program, where Americans would once more step onto the lunar surface. The program ran from 2005 to 2009 and aimed to recapture the glory of those original Apollo missions. In fact, it's been described as Apollo on steroids. They also wanted to go one better and help humankind reach Mars. Developments such as the Ares rocket, Orion crew capsule, and the Altair lunar lander all came from the research for Constellation. Unfortunately, Constellation itself never took off, so to speak. Launched by President George W. Bush, it was later canceled by his successor, Barack Obama, due to budgetary concerns. 21. Mars Telecommunications Orbiter. What do orbiters and landers visiting Mars need more than anything? Well, aside from, getting there in the first place, they need to communicate their findings back here to Earth. NASA wanted to boost these signals by building a telecommunications orbiter. It would be placed in orbit around the red planet and use a laser-based optical system designed to broaden bandwidth and ensure smooth comms between machines and humans. Of course, NASA had a bunch of other Mars-related stuff on the table, and in the end, they had to prioritize. The orbital plans went in the trash before it could process a single reading. 20. In-Situ Explorer. In the 90s, NASA attempted to land on Venus with a special mission in mind. It wouldn't just touch down on the planet's surface, it would explore what lay below. The In-Situ Explorer was equipped with a drill to burrow down and see what the far-off world was made of. This plan sounds dramatic, and ultimately it didn't happen. Looking at what conditions are like up on Venus, I'm not surprised. It has an extremely dense atmosphere with incredible pressure waiting for any vehicle brave enough to make a planetfall. This would be tough enough for a heavy-duty spacecraft, let alone smaller instruments such as drills. On top of this, the agency only had so much money to spend, another factor that stopped the In-Situ Explorer going boldly where no drill had gone before. 19. NERVA. The N in the name NERVA stands for nuclear, making this a powerful but potentially dangerous mission that NASA had to abandon. Its full title was the Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Application. Worked on in the 60s and 70s, it sought to combine the power of nuclear energy with the flight of a rocket. For a while, things seemed to be going well. This nuclear option had the edge over the old propulsion systems, which used liquid and chemical elements to blast off. Overall, NERVA was more efficient. However, the fact that it was a flying nuke, liable to cause serious destruction if it went wrong, meant this particular mission had to abort. 18. Project Prometheus. Long before the name Prometheus was linked to the Alien franchise, it was used to describe yet another NASA effort with a big nuclear flavor. And no, not the Prometheus school of running away from things. The project wanted to harness nuclear power to send spacecraft deep among the stars. These weren't short hops or trips to the moon and back. I'm talking Star Trek levels of exploration. First on the list of areas to visit was the moons of Jupiter, namely Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. The latter is 1.17 million miles away. The Prometheus project planned to launch a craft called the Jupiter Icy Moons Orbiter so they could investigate the moons close up. Sadly, the incredible mission was cut to just 2 years between 2003 and 2005, plus it never left the planning phase. How come? Well, the ancient Greek titan Prometheus had to deal with being chained to a rock and getting brutally attacked by an eagle. NASA's Prometheus fell to Earth thanks to money worries at the agency. 17. VentureStar. When we think of space travel today, we think of tech bros and private investment. Back in the 90s, people looked to NASA for the exciting possibility of flying a plane into space. Working with aerospace giant Lockheed Martin, the agency developed the X-33 VentureStar, a reusable vehicle for those explorers on a budget, or at least the cheaper end of an already super expensive market. They built a small-scale prototype showcasing features such as a linear aerospike engine, something that can keep the same level of efficiency at different altitudes. The plane also had composite fuel tanks containing liquid hydrogen. It was these elements and others that proved too ambitious, with failures at the testing stage helping ground the VentureStar just as the 21st century got started. 16. Lunar Trailblazer. This was a mission to map water on the moon, but unfortunately NASA's finest got wet in another way, having to take a bath on the project shortly after it launched in 2025. The Lunar Trailblazer was supposed to send back high-definition images examining how water worked up there. Instead, the team lost communications with the Trailblazer the day after it launched. They're still thirsty for information about moon water though, so I'm sure they'll find another way of getting the info sooner rather than later. 15. Asteroid Redirect Mission. NASA is usually on point, but this mission sounded a little crazy to some. As the name suggests, the idea was to redirect an asteroid. How on earth were they going to do that? By using a robot-powered craft to visit a passing asteroid, pick a boulder off it, then redirect that boulder into an orbit around the moon. Why? Experts hope to study the asteroid particle and test the technology behind the vehicle handling the boulder, which was based on solar electric propulsion. It sounds interesting, but was maybe a little too out there to last the distance. The space community weren't all convinced this was a good idea, or a worthwhile use of NASA's time and resources. After several years of development, the project was wrapped up in 2017. 14. SNAP program. Nuclear power plants for satellites? That was an objective behind the Systems for Nuclear Auxiliary Power program, or SNAP, first developed by NASA in the 50s. Weird as it sounds, the agency seriously considered the concept of a reactor being flown into space. They also worked on nuclear batteries called RTGs, or radioisotope thermoelectric generators. While the mission was partially successful, with the SNAP-10A reactor blasting off into space in 1965, the program eventually shut down. I guess people were worried that what started as a snap might end with a kaboom. 13. Project Morpheus. The Morpheus lander was intended as a cargo delivery system. Taking off and landing vertically, it was hoped the SUV-sized vehicle would put NASA on a footing with Amazon when it came to space-based packages, as well as general transportation. I'm being a little flippant with that comment, but the basic idea is pretty much the same, right? The project was worked on between 2010 and 2014, and it had some explosive moments along the way. In 2012, the prototype blew up during a test flight, which was something, of a setback. I wanted my mail-order steaks medium rare, not cremated. 12. Advanced Solar Sail Demonstration. Space shuttles blast off into space, but solar sails keep spacecraft flying through the stars. These special sails, which don't rely on fuel, have been successfully flown. However, it took some work to get them there. One mission, the Advanced Solar Sail Demonstration, was launched by NASA in the 2000s. The idea behind the sails is that they harness solar energy through the use of photons. The photons, or light energy, hit the surface of the sail, which then creates pressure to push it forward. Challenges involving materials and cost meant the agency faced numerous obstacles. The victory eventually belonged to Japan, who launched a controlled solar sail mission in 2010. That said, NASA got their act together the same year with the NanoSail D satellite. They continued to enjoy their moment in the sun with another launch in 2024. Plain sailing, it wasn't. The sail on that failed to unfurl properly, showing that technical problems are a fact of life in space travel. All I can do is picture the sailor from Tron. And Star Wars. And I want to. Dooku's. 11. Lunar Outpost. One achievement that has so far eluded NASA is the construction of a lunar base on, the moon. Hence lunar. Reports reveal they considered the idea in 1968. This would have seen a permanent home for astronauts on the surface of the moon by 1980. It had potential as a landing site that could be used again and again by visitors. Having a base also meant experts staying longer and carrying out studies, with an International Lunar Scientific Observatory mentioned in paperwork. This structure would have held 12 people, though in the end, nothing came of it. Efforts to construct a moon base are ongoing, with the agency hoping to have one up and running by 2024. They didn't. 10. Mars Ares. In 2002, a plane concept dubbed Ares was proposed to NASA. Coming from the Langley Research Center, it was a robotic rocket designed to fly over the surface of Mars at a distance of 1 mile. ARES stands for Aerial Regional Scale Environmental Survey. The aim of the Prospect mission was to gather information on the Martian atmosphere, its magnetic field and terrain, plus what lay beneath the ground there. The team would place the vehicle itself inside a protective shell traveling to Mars. ARES would sit inside the shell, folded up, and be released when it got within range. It was a cool proposal. However, it wasn't the only one being made. There were 25 ideas relating to Mars submitted by various teams. ARES made the final 4, but lost out at that final hurdle. Meanwhile, another idea for a lander called Phoenix was given the green light, going on to reach Mars in 2008. Speaking of Tron, ARES. There's so many Tron references. 9. SEI. Did you know there's a strong connection between the Bush family and space exploration? While these ideas never quite came to fruition, they produced some interesting missions. President George H.W. Bush announced the Space Exploration Initiative, or SEI. He chose the 20th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission to declare the USA open for business when it came to blasting off into deep space. Did a new golden age dawn for NASA and its astronauts as a result? No. Bush had big ambitions, but he was hampered by a little thing called Congress. They needed to approve the vast sums involved, totaling hundreds of billions of dollars. The will just wasn't there, and by the 90s, the SEI was MIA. 8. Enterprise upgrade. The Space Shuttle Enterprise was introduced by NASA in the 70s. It was instrumental in their development of their iconic shuttle, acting as an orbiter for atmospheric test flights. Unlike the vehicles that followed it, the Enterprise didn't have features like a thermal protection system. It also didn't have an engine, making it unsuitable for anything beyond tests and trials. That didn't stop NASA attempting to upgrade it, however. They figured they might be able to use the basic structure as the beginnings of a new shuttle like Challenger and Endeavour. This idea didn't pan out, as it proved too costly to perform the so-called orbital upgrade. NASA wanted to save money, not spend the same amount they would on a brand new shuttle. Enterprise wound up staying on the ground instead of soaring amongst the stars. 7. Lunar Polar Orbiter. In 1976, a lunar mission was dreamt up in the corridors of NASA. Several years after the last time humankind set foot on the moon, experts wanted to obtain more information on this mysterious destination. They couldn't do this with astronauts, so decided on a vehicle to orbit our closest satellite. Enter the Lunar Polar Orbiter, which was intended to take off in 1980. The orbiter's function was to measure gravity and other factors such as moon magnetism. From this, the agency could study the moon's chemical and mineral makeup. The agency's Jet Propulsion Laboratory looked into whether the craft would be feasible for its proposed one-year mission. The unmanned craft concept was designed to study the moon from a distance of 62 miles. It wouldn't be alone either. A sub-satellite was supposed to accompany the polar orbiter, taking readings when its bigger brother was obscured by the moon and out of range. The LPO is a great reminder of how NASA came up with great ideas that didn't necessarily work out. That doesn't mean the ideas weren't useful for other things. In fact, you could argue the failures were more instructive than the successes. 6. Mars Observer. Reaching Mars has been long and frustrating for NASA. They've reached the surface with unmanned robotic vehicles, but even that has been a challenge. One story that shows the problems involved is that of the Mars Observer, which launched in the early 90s and nearly got to land on the Martian landscape. Unfortunately, luck was not on the agency's side. Despite spending close to a year in space traveling to Mars, the observer went dark. NASA couldn't make contact with the craft, and what was especially galling was the time it chose to max out. The observer was just 3 days away from entering Mars's orbit. What caused the failure? Obviously, technicians didn't know, but they had an idea. It's believed a rupture in the fuel pressurization tank led to the craft going off-grid permanently. Off-grid, more Tron stuff. This is just a Tron list. 5. Habitat Demonstration Unit. If you're going to visit an alien planet, you need to know what to expect once you get there. This isn't something you can guarantee 100%, even if you work for an organization like NASA. However, you can prepare as much as possible. And one way the agency did this was by constructing a habitat demonstration unit in the 2010s. It was 10.8 feet high and 16.4 feet in diameter, and gave people an immersive experience designed to simulate the exact conditions in far-off places such as the Moon and Mars. Where do you test a structure like this? The team wanted places that were similar to alien landscapes, so the desert in Arizona was a perfect choice. This idea wasn't totally abandoned, but the agency decided not to proceed with it in that form. 4. Project Tethered Satellite. Tethers are important for keeping astronauts in position during space missions, but do they have other uses? NASA has shown they most definitely do. For example, they've worked with tethers and satellites as a means of generating electricity. The 90s project involved releasing satellites from a shuttle attached to a 12-mile-long tether. It would theoretically interact with Earth's magnetic field, potentially producing power or thrust for propulsion. The attempt was ambitious, but ultimately unsuccessful. The Tether project was given the thumbs down when the connection snapped, revealing the dangers of relying on this system. 3. Skylab Reboost. Space stations are cool, but they have a habit of crashing back down to Earth. It's just the way these sort of things work. But in the late 70s, NASA thought they might be able to save one before it entered Earth's atmosphere. The Skylab Reboost sought to reverse the orbit of the station of the same name, boosting it back to life so it can continue its mission. They wanted to do this using a space shuttle. However, there was one problem. The shuttle needed to handle the assignment hadn't been built yet. It was all a question of timing, with the station heading closer and closer while the shuttle remained in the construction phase. By the time they got it to the launch pad, it would be too late. Skylab landed back on Earth after all. 2. Project Longshot. The Alpha Centauri system is 4,367 light-years away, which sounds impossible to reach. Of course, that wasn't too much of a stretch for NASA, who actually planned a mission to explore the system. And if that doesn't sound crazy enough, then get this. They wanted to use a probe that could be assembled in space. Project Longshot, which dates back to 1988, was developed in partnership with the US Naval Academy. The vehicle would be launched into orbit and collected at a base called Space Station Freedom, where the assembly part would happen. Ironically, Space Station Freedom was another project that was abandoned. After being completed, the probe would be released to cover the enormous distance between our system and that of Alpha Centauri. It would use something called an inertial confinement fusion drive, plus a dedicated fission reactor to get where it was going. Those two elements take some explaining, so it's probably for the best that Longshot proved too much of a dream to become reality. 1. US and Russian collaboration. The United States and Russia haven't exactly hit it off over the decades, so it may surprise you to hear they wanted to work on space projects together. Some have been more successful than others, however, it helped when the Cold War ended. An interesting example from this period was the forming of a group to explore Mars. Mars Together was a collaboration which sought to fly a joint surveying mission to the Red Planet in 1998. It was reportedly abandoned following financial issues on the Russian side. The possibilities were exciting. However, old tensions have resurfaced since the 90s, so it'll be interesting to see if anything comes of such a collaboration in future decades. And that's all for today. What do you make of these abandoned ideas? Do you think they should have been given a moonshot? Or did they deserve to end up in the galactic trash can? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're still itching to explore space exploration, then I have another video ready for you right now you can watch right here. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon. I'll see you moon. That was awful.